Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, July 13th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about a brand new NPR and Marist College poll that was released that shows President Biden largely in an unchanged race following the debate, in fact, improving off his June numbers that were taken prior to the first presidential debate. Now, this comes at a time that stands in direct opposition with a lot of what we've been seeing on Twitter and in the mainstream media about Biden's campaign completely collapsing following the debate. We are over 2 weeks after the first presidential debate, and nearly all the news coverage seems to be about President Biden's fitness to serve, President Biden's debate performance, President Biden's donor pool, and yet new polls coming out show President Biden making improvements off of where he was before. Now, this seems to be starting at a point where President Biden is getting a bit stagnant in the presidential polls, and so is President Trump. Because over the past 2 weeks, we've seen that as a direct cause of what we've seen from the first presidential debate, Biden has lost some ground in some battleground polls and in some national polls as well. What we saw was that, generally speaking, Donald Trump made minor advancements off where he was before. If he was up by 4 before, he's up by 6. If he was up by 2 before, he's up by 3. If he was up by 1 before, he's up by 2. But we've also seen some things move in the opposite direction. The two most recent polls, Rasmussen report shows Trump with a 6-point advantage. You might be thinking, wait, isn't that saying Trump is going to win this election? Evidently, no. Because what it does show is that there has been an improvement here for President Biden, and Rasmussen reports, I hate to say it, isn't the most reputable pollster in the world. They are very, very, very far right-wing when it comes down to ideological standpoint, and also are very public about being Donald Trump's favorite pollster. He cites them very often. They were the only pollster after the insurrection to show President Trump with a positive approval rating when he was down -20 nationwide. And so to put that into perspective, Trump being up just by 6 points in Rasmussen reports when he was up by 9 after the first debate, goes to show that there has been some improvement for President Biden. But it has been reaffirmed by a mainstream, very respectable pollster, NPR, PBS News, and also Marist College. This is a poll that was done that really does show good news for President Biden nationwide, but also puts us back into perspective and grounds us as to what matters to voters. Because while I'm sure we can make an entire video talking about just the 2-point lead that President Biden has, which he actually directly mentioned in a debate rally, not a debate rally, in a rally yesterday in the state of Michigan, this 2-point advantage for President Biden can be explained by the way that voters are taking the first debate and taking President Biden in terms of mental fitness to serve, in terms of telling the truth, in terms of job approval rating. And this overall shows exactly why President Biden actually stands to be at a better point than what some of the post-debate polls might have initially shown, or based on what some of the vibes might tell us following that first debate. So again, reminder here, Biden has a 2-point advantage. This is the first poll we have seen since the debate, showing sort of a trend line here. Rasmussen reports with an improvement here for President Biden, then NPR and Marist College showing Biden now with a 2-point advantage when he was tied before. We are seeing President Biden arguably in a better position than where he was in June, which means we really need to understand why that is. Because this does, again, stand directly in opposition with what we have seen from pundits, what we have seen from forecasters, what we have seen from the media, and I think it will show a very interesting result. And so I pulled up some individual questions that they've decided to ask, things about mental fitness to serve, job approval rating, Project 2025, all of these different things, because it does matter and explains possibly why Biden is still able to maintain a lead even after the first debate, when in this poll exactly, you will find that the majority of Americans are not confident in Biden's fitness to serve for another 4-year term. And yet, he still maintains a lead over President Trump. And so to start off with that poll in the first place, the question was framed, do you think Joe Biden has the mental fitness to serve as president? Do you think Donald Trump has the mental fitness to serve as president? Off the baseline, Donald Trump wins this vote, 50-49. 50% of voters say that Donald Trump has the mental fitness to serve, 49% say no. On the Joe Biden front, it's just 35%. And so with polls like these, and these were the ones that were taken in the immediate aftermath of the debate, not many head-to-head national polls because the focus was on President Biden's mental acuity, the way he was able to articulate himself, all of these different things, you would seem to say there's no reality in which this electorate is choosing Biden over Trump. And yet they do. And you have to ask yourselves, maybe, just maybe, when people are being asked about President Biden's mental fitness to serve, that may not be the only thing people are taking into account when it comes down to a presidential election. And I know that may seem like something that is entirely out of reality. And I think that is largely because all of our mainstream media discussion has been about Biden cannot serve another 4-year term. The op-ed from the New York Times editorial board saying Biden needs to step out of the race. A bunch of different groups as well across the country concurring in that opinion, saying that President Biden needs to step out of the race. He needs to allow a younger generation to move up and take the helm. He cannot win an election with numbers like these. And yet he does. And I find it to be uniquely interesting that when we talk about this too, and we'll get to another point where they ask the question in specific, what do you care more about? On this topic, you'll find that very often voters do in fact care about truth and security and the economy more than they care about an individual's mental fitness to serve. Because a lot of what we've seen from many Democrats, too, is a shifting in terms of messaging. That you are not only voting for Joe Biden, but you are voting for an administration that is young, that is diverse, that has new ideas, that is, coming from this era post-COVID, into a new Democratic administration, post-Obama era Democratic politics, post-Bill Clinton Democratic politics. I mean, you are talking about a complete rebrand of American politics being done under a Biden administration. And voters know that. Voters are taking that into account when they make decisions like these. Otherwise, numbers like this simply could not exist. It could not be that nearly 2/3 of this country believes that Biden does not have the mental fitness to serve as president, and yet he wins a poll, because voters here do in fact care about far more than what they see after a debate, far more than what they see in the mainstream media headlines. And you also find, too, that this same exact line of questioning used back in 2020, while far better for President Biden, was in the hovering around the 50 to 51%. I mean, just roughly half of this nation believed Joe Biden had the mental fitness to serve as president back in 2020. And so today, for that to be a reduction, and yet him still to have won that victory, 306 to 232, 7 million vote victory, won states like Georgia and Arizona for the first time since the 90s. Talk about a post-Bill Clinton era. Well, he won some of those states back. You find, though, that just half of this nation believed he had the mental fitness to serve, the other half did not. And while 35% is nowhere near, as bad, or nowhere near as good, rather, as 50% for President Biden, it clearly shows that in this electorate, because these are the same group of people, the same 1,309 adults are saying that Biden does not have the mental fitness to serve, and yet are re-electing him because there are things that extend far beyond, again, some headlines from the New York Times, some headlines from CNN, and some, just general consensus points that some voters might have that might say, hey, I don't know if Biden is going to serve out this 4-year term with the strongest mental, fitness that I would have liked him to, but he's better than Donald Trump. Anyone's better than Donald Trump. It's never Trump. I'd vote for a rock over Donald Trump. These are the things you're starting to hear circulated from voters. Why? Because of January 6th, because of the 34 felony convictions, because of the hush money payments, because of different things that you are finding that Donald Trump now has baggage that he did not have his baggage in 2020, or maybe even did too. There are voters out there that completely despise the way he handled COVID, completely despise the way he handled the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. There are so many different things that I think the Democratic Party did correctly back in 2020 to win that election. Many of it can be brought back up in 2024, but equally, there are new things for people to stand on. There are new legs for people to position themselves on as to why they may not be voting for Donald Trump. And so understanding this at baseline, again, two things can equally exist because they do amongst the same group of people. And so moving on, we can also talk about, too, job approval rating amongst registered voters who definitely plan to vote. Why does this matter? This is the often most engaged portion of the electorate. People who say, I'm definitely going to vote. That's not even a question. But also, they're registered voters, not just adults, but registered voters. People who have gone out there and said, I am going to vote. I'm a registered Democrat, I'm a registered Independent, registered Republican, and I'm going to vote. And what we have found is that over the past 3 months, somehow the Democratic Party has changed the perception on Biden's overall job rating. In May, net negative 11 points. Registered voters who were definitely going to vote disapproved of President Biden's performance in office by 11 points nationwide. In June, we started to see some recovery. But again, this was a pre-debate poll. And so many people would say that after this debate, people would completely warp and throw out their expectations and what they had seen from the Biden administration and said, it's completely a sham. There's no reality in which Biden led this home. And yet, in July, net negative 5. We have seen a consistent trend line here where more and more people are becoming less oppositional to President Biden and more willing to adopt a positive view of him, or just simply a viewpoint that is just saying, I'm voting for Biden because he is not Trump. And that is the way that voters, Democrats rather, will win this election. You also have to take a look, too, at this new term that we did not see a year ago, Project 2025. If you don't know what that is, I'd encourage you to Google it and not to lean too heavily into the Democratic Party messaging there. But I think it is a very real reality in which Project 2025 is now a mainstream topic of conversation for the average voter, especially the average engaged voter in this election. A topic of conversation that was pushed heavily by the Democratic Party, and they will now say things like Google Project 2025, but I encourage you to do so, because it does outline what a second Donald Trump term would be. And Donald Trump came out and said, I don't know who's part of Project 2025. We know that he does. You are talking about people who directly served in his administration. Ben Carson is one of the authors of Project 2025. And so when Donald Trump goes out there and says, I don't know who is writing Project 2025, I don't agree with it at all, it actually generated far more media attention. It has now been receiving more Google searches than Taylor Swift, more Google searches than the NFL. You are talking about a Project 2025 built by the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank, conservative policy wing of the Republican Party that in many other elections, this would be completely thrown under the rug. Project 2025 is exactly what Republicans and Democrats do leading into an election where they can outline their plan, their agenda for a next term, for an upcoming term, whatever it might be. And Project 2025 is exactly that. But it is a 900-page policy plan, a 900-page policy plan for the Republican Party, for a Donald Trump second term, and 41% of Americans have an unfavorable view of Project 2025, and 50% of Americans associate it with Donald Trump. Clearly, the Republican Party line of messaging that Project 2025 is not Donald Trump's agenda is not working, because 1 in 2 voters now associate it with Trump and have heard of it. It's not a good place to be, and they're not the only polling group to say that. We find two. YouGov found that Project 2025, 32% of Americans have a very unfavorable view of Project 2025. 1 in 3 voters feel passionately enough to say they have a very unfavorable view of Project 2025. Now, whether or not Donald Trump supports Project 2025, 44% combined say either he supports it a great deal, that's a third of this nation, and 12% more, that total up to the 44, say that Donald Trump somewhat supports Project 2025. With a plan like this, that is so exceptionally unpopular, while it may not be something that Donald Trump has directly on his campaign website, which is arguable depending on what you look at as Donald Trump's website, because his own super PAC actually owns the domain TrumpProject2025.com. When you go to it, they talk about their vision for a Trump second term. And so really that calls into question, do they actually not know what Project 2025 is? Because chances are they do, which is why they're distancing themselves. Clearly it's not polling well, but that again can explain the line of reasoning as to why Biden might be back up in the lead, might be doing better than he was in June, even after what was largely seen as a disastrous debate performance. The Democratic Party seems to be in a state of disarray when it comes down to whether or not President Biden should run for re-election. Many Democrats have come out in full force, more than not, but it's also many Democrats have also said that President Biden should step down, that he should allow someone like Vice President Harris or an open convention to step in and go ahead and take this and win in this election. But we are nearly 100 days away from the 2024 presidential election, and the clock is ticking. And the Biden campaign has been looking for some good news, and good news they have found. Now, NPR, Marist College, and PBS News, this is not the gold standard, and this is not the poll here that could end all the discourse on this conversation. It very much seems, in a way, like it's jumping out here. It does come as the most recent poll, and one that stands in direct opposition with a very big line here, which I think can be explained by the way the voters here feel about things like Project 2025, the way they feel about mental fitness, the way they feel about things like the truth. You find that voters in this exact poll believe that they would prefer a president who speaks the truth more than they prefer a president, or more, they worry more about a president who says the truth and tells them what it is than they do about a president who is mentally fit to serve. And that is roughly a 2-to-1 ratio there of voters who are saying they care more about truth and honesty than they do about mental fitness. And again, that can be a large explanation as to why Biden is able to win back this lead, because it is clear that even with numbers like these, Biden still has a pathway to victory, and there are polls that show him in that pathway to victory. While the electoral map doesn't look too hot right now, there's no way to at all work around this, right? 312 to 226 is my most recent electoral projection for Donald Trump winning re-election over Joe Biden. Don't get me wrong. I have one of the most conservative estimates, conservative meaning pro-Republican estimates we have seen from many people on this website, on YouTube, many people in the mainstream media, because this is a snapshot in time. And after that first debate, this is where I thought the nation was. Do we think the nation is here today? That's arguable. I still think Donald Trump wins the election. I don't know if it's 312. It might be 312. I haven't given it as much thought, but I do believe that the numbers have gotten better for Biden since that debate, since we saw those first numbers come out of it in the end of June and early July, since this prediction. Biden may not be fully back there up to winning, and certainly not where he was in 2020. But counting him out could be a huge political mistake for the Democratic Party for a nominee that was chosen by Democratic Party voters, but equally too, one that has been the only Democrat or Republican who has ever been able to take down Donald Trump. While the numbers may not be super hot right now, I do believe that based on numbers like these and polling data like this one, you can find that there probably will be a lot more conversations around President Biden's job approval rating, Project 2025, mental fitness, and overall general election performance for both Vice President Harris and, of course, President Biden, who stands to serve as the nominee for the ticket. And I think that probably will not be changing as we get closer to the election. I think it will be a very, very difficult thing to imagine a reality in which Biden does, in fact, step down from this position of being the Democratic nominee, which is why I don't think it's going to happen, especially with data like this one. data points like this one, which shows that the presidential race is either unchanged or improved for President Biden, which shows that Biden does still have a pathway to victory. While it may be slim, this election was always going to be close. And the way that this race is won for President Biden, his campaign has acknowledged it internally and externally, is through those Rust Belt states. And based on what we've been seeing in terms of campaign performances in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, it is clear those are becoming the 3 target states for the Biden campaign, states that they know they have a pathway to victory with margins like this one. And while they are very, very narrow, it relies on entire political force turnout for Democrats here, and that's what they need to work for between now and November. Turnout of their base and winning over independents the same way they did in 2020 with very minimal bleeding. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.